Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another Sunday book chat. I'm Zahra from Collapse Life. As always, I'm joined by the lovely Susan from Courageous Conversations. How are you doing today, Susan?
I'm doing fine. We've been a bit more time traveling, haven't we? We started our spring special or summertime, and
Yes.
so we're an hour ahead. I don't know how that affects people, but thank you for joining us and making the effort. It's good to
Yeah,
know.
absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for joining. As I mentioned before, are so looking forward now to these Sunday chats for the little group that has been joining us regularly, and for anyone who is tuning in new, welcome. We usually use this hour or hour and a bit to we use a book usually as a jumping off point to spark a conversation and a discussion amongst our group, asking questions about how the world is changing, what collapse actually looks like and feels like, and what we can do about it, mostly, especially on the practical and kind of building strategies side. So last week we started talking about food, about our highly industrialized food system and how vulnerable it has become, and particularly with the war in Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. There's a lot of talk right now about a coming famine, not only in other parts of the world, but even potentially for Europe and North America. Largely, this is because of transportation costs being raised with oil prices and gas prices high now, but also because so much of the raw materials for fertilizer passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Um, and that is going to, at this particular time of year, really impact farmers around the world who rely on that fertilizer to grow their crops. So we started talking about some of the issues, and we were looking at a book called Fiat Food, which really unpacked some of the different ways in which over the past few decades food has become what it is now, a system, an economic system. And today we're looking at another book, which I've had in my little online library for a while. And it draws on the idea of food and what to do about it in a crisis, but it also kind of echoes another book that we talked about recently, which was by Dmitry Orlov. Orlov looked at collapse in the Soviet Union in the 1990s. And today's book is it's by an author called Selko Begovich, and he looks at life during the Balkan War. He's written a few books, and the one that we're looking at today is called the SHTF, the Shit Hits the Fan Anthology: Survival Lessons from the Balkan Wars. Um, and he has a few things to say in there about food itself. So, Susan, what were your thoughts? I know you didn't get much of a chance to look it over because I sent it to you rather late, but what were your initial thoughts?
I had a skim through it and I particularly looked at the food section, and I thought it had some very valuable things and some surprising things that I would never have thought of. Obviously, it was pretty drastic. They were under siege, being bombed, reliant on food parcels. That is the extreme. But you mentioned Orloff because he writes about the 5 stages of collapse. And that's one of the latest stages, and who knows what we're going to face. And there was also stuff about solutions, which we said we would talk about this
Mm.
week. So yeah, I think it's a good launch point.
Yeah. So it occurred to me as I was thinking about this conversation today that I might take a bit of a devil's advocate perspective just to push on some of the potential solutions, because they're not always feasible or possible for everyone. And I think it just goes to show, not that we don't try, but that there's no one size fits all that will work for everyone. And I think that Selko's book really shows that. He was um, in an urban environment. They were not, he says a number of times in the book, we were not preppers. We didn't have 3 months of food stored up somewhere in our backyard. We didn't rely on having an abundant garden in the backyard because we didn't need to. So, what happens when you're unprepared, and something catastrophic happens um, in a short amount of time? And so he has some things to say about whether foraging is viable in that case, or how do you protect a garden if you're growing one under siege, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I just thought I thought it would spark some good conversation,
Yeah.
and we can certainly share a link for others to be able to find this book and look it over, and let us know what your thoughts are as well. Maybe just to kick off the conversation, I wanted to ask what people have been seeing in their local environment over the last week in terms of prices, or maybe things going missing on the shelves, or just human interactions. How have people been reacting to the war and the closure and the headlines saying famine is coming, these kinds of things? I always wonder how much of what the news is reporting is just a fear reaction, trying to drum up that kind of passive state that comes from people feeling afraid. Um, so I just wonder what other people have been experiencing, since we do have a very wide ranging geography in our group.
Oh, we've had some comments in already this morning. This evening for some of us, I expect. Yeah, Jim Cannibal. I'm a bio major. Mum is a published soil scientist. So far, these videos and books have been toxically over optimistic. Gosh. Well, tell us more, I think. And he says, I wish you the best and hope this video will be more courageous and honest. Okay, the denial already subtly began. Okay, he's gone, or they have gone. I didn't think we'd done that, but obviously in that view we have. I think we've been as realistically honest as we possibly can with the information that we have. And while people are sort of thinking or typing and commenting on what's going on in your local area, I thought I would add some things that are happening in the UK. Obviously, there's the whole thing about the decrease in fertilizer and wheat prices expected to rise by 30 to 40%. Well, obviously, that's a staple. And the other thing that caught my eye, which I think is so reassuring, because our government did have a special emergency meeting about fuel prices and are talking about, but haven't done it yet, lowering the tax. But the other thing that they've done in this food crisis scenario that's probably coming is that they have, in their wisdom, Chancellor Rachel Reeves has made the announcement that there's now a 2 billion sovereign artificial intelligence fund. It was apparently a top priority for the government to stem the flow of AI research and development startups leaving the UK to invest in other countries. They could have put that 2 billion towards food systems and improving them. So I thought that was interesting.
Mm.
And the other one, which I got from Exposed News, is that the UK is top of the list of European countries for over 50% of our food is ultra processed.
Yes. Yeah, following very closely behind the US. I don't know what the number is here, but I'm sure it is as much or higher. And that's another thing that I wanted to discuss with the group, because so many people do eat ultra processed foods. We know that they're bad. We don't have to discuss the merits or downfalls of what they do to our health, but people eat them. They are inexpensive, they're addictive, and easy. And so a lot of people turn to them. And so what happens now in times of scarcity? You can't switch all of those people into a new way of eating overnight. you can't get them all to start cooking or eating organic vegetables or going vegan or whatever it is that you might want to propose as a solution. So I guess maybe there's no answer to this, but what happens to those people? Um, do the costs of those ultra processed foods go up incrementally as well? Can they still afford to eat? And what are their alternatives? There's a great comment just in terms of what people are seeing. Carney says, I strongly believe we cannot prep our way out of a collapse. And I would love to hear more on that. He adds, I was at Costco yesterday. A man was talking about 10, 25 pounds of flour. He seemed stressed. Other people or are oblivious. He or she, sorry. So one man was stressed about getting bulk flour, but other people were just going about their days. That's what I was going to say that we noticed as well. That I think I mentioned this last week as well. The supermarket parking lot was full. People were inside shopping away, seemingly as normal. We noticed certainly the price of meat seems to have increased. And there were fewer things, say, on clearance or discount shelves in the supermarket. We only bought maybe 2 small bags of groceries and walked out of there. It was $75. That's hard. Other people do seem oblivious. They don't maybe buy the same things that we buy, but
Well, you seem to have frozen, Zahra. So, yeah, maybe there are other comments coming in. I'll check on the other side and just see. Yeah, you've come back. There you go. You were just
Yeah.
talking about the supermarket, and I think that's where it's hit. Because the other thing, and this came up in Fiat Food, wasn't it? The advantages of to the government and the collective of the organizations, the industrial food system and pharmaceutical system, is that processed food makes it very cheap. And apparently Singapore, that was the other thing I saw this week, has now approved 16 insects for human consumption. So we mustn't lose sight of this is the plan, that our choices of food that we would like to eat to be healthy is now being removed because there are other sort of foods that will be coming in that we will be desperate for. So that was interesting. And then go on.
I was just going to pick up on that. That is interesting coming out of Singapore. There was a story that we put in our news roundup today about it was from the climate desk, which is this collaboration of various different news organizations. So what I shared came through Mother Jones magazine. But it was reported by Vox, and it was about how the insect farming industry in Europe and North America is experiencing major financial stress. And I think something like 20% of the major startups in that sector have now declared bankruptcy and are closing. To me, this is a good thing. This is good news. The economic model is not working. So capitalism wins. If there's no demand for this stuff, apparently it will not. It will not succeed. I'm happy to see that. However, one of the things that I noted in the story is that largely these startups are in Europe and some in North America, and it takes a very high amount of energy to keep these indoor insect farms warm enough to be able to grow the insects. And so what we might start to see, and this connects to your point, is the offshoring of the industry to warmer climates where it doesn't take as much fuel to heat the whatever it is warehouse where they hatch these larvae. So Singapore being involved and making public announcements about regulations may indicate that Asia will be the new base for the insect farming industry. It's not going away. It may change names too, because here in North America and Europe, we just don't like the idea. We find it icky and gross. So they may call it something else, but I'm pretty sure we'll be eating cricket flour before too long.
I think it's already in foods. I think that's part of it. Had a comment from Christine. Good to know you're here, Christine. Budget and convenience are two things I can't get my mother to work past. At this point, I'm just trying to get her to expand her pantry with the items she already purchases that have a long shelf life. Yeah, great solutions, great encouragement. That is the seduction, isn't it, of processed food? And it's cheap, it's available, it's convenient, it's fast. I read something years ago, the average time that people spend cooking in the evening? And this was from Sainsbury's, one of our major supermarkets. Even in those days, it was 12 minutes.
Yeah. That connects perfectly to this other comment from Kearney. In the cities, households are under-resourced with no skills and no storage space. People do not know how to cook from scratch. That absolutely true. And Rachel Wild says, I'm a market trader, and I know that people are out in force probably to enjoy a sense of community, but hardly anyone is buying anything other than food. My log supplier has sold 1/3 less wood this winter than last. I think there's a race on between fiscal scarcity and food scarcity to determine which comes in first in reducing the amount of food on our plates. 50% processed food and adopting AI twice as fast as anywhere else. AI, Google Gemini, reckons that we're going to lose 25% of jobs this year. Removing that amount of spending power out of the economy is going to be catastrophic all around.
Yeah, we're being squeezed in all directions, aren't we? Yeah. So talking of solutions, so one of them, as Christine said, and we've talked about, is coming off processed food, learning to cook, helping other people cook, going to cookery lessons or buying cookery books. I've sort of self-taught. I'm sure a lot of people are. And it does take time, and not everybody likes cooking. It's very difficult, isn't it, culturally? We're not encouraged to cook and share meals and all of that, like some other cultures are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's funny in Europe. That was always from the North American perspective. Europe was all about eating culture and cooking and pouring love into meals and things like that. And I think that is also changing, even in places like France and Italy, where that was a given. Everybody came together for a meal. I think that's also changed very rapidly, even in the course of maybe the last 10, 15 years. And we can see that we've been reading headlines about how we've hit peak wine, and fewer people are drinking wine. And that goes hand in hand with fewer and fewer people cooking and enjoying meals around a table. It's maybe one person eating in a hurry while on the go, or two people, but just kind of preparing something, either a ready-made meal or ultra processed food, and not that doesn't really go with opening a nice bottle of wine and sitting around and enjoying it. So yeah, these are big things, and I tend to agree that we can't prep our way out of this. But we also don't want to see people falling apart and starving. So I guess that's why we wanted to have this conversation and just get other people's ideas.
We need to, I'm saying we, the royal we, always have some food in store. I mean, even if it's under the bed, or empty a cupboard of something and put some baked beans or different sort of foods in them, because when we know from when COVID came that people panicked, it was like suddenly all the shops were empty. There was panic buying everywhere. And you raised another point about people eating, solitary eating. I read something on a prepper thing about just working out what every member of your family eats. We've been so indulged, in terms of specific dietary requirements, which is going to make it even more difficult to store food, to cook food when it's under conditions that are very different to the ones that we have now.
Mm.
And I don't know what people are storing. It would be really interesting to know that. I listened to something today, and picks up your wine point, that alcohol will still be very much available because they want to dumb us down. So coffee, wine, drugs will all still be available. And in fact, I think I got that in the book, wasn't it? That they won't be,
Maybe.
yeah, that they won't be so tradable. Or alcohol, you think that would go up high in value, because he talks about the, in the Shit Hit the Fan book, he talks about what you can trade, which is another aspect to be thinking about. But let's just talk about this prepping. And yet storing food is not a long-term solution. It's only going to get you by short-term.
That's
And
my big
depending
concern.
on your space and your understanding of the best foods to store, it can get you by the initial panic and chaos.
Yeah, that's always my big concern. It's certainly a wise thing to do. It's a great short-term solution, but how much food can the average person really store up? I mean, there are these extreme preppers who have 3 years of food and water in an underground cellar somewhere, but that's going to be dehydrated food that requires water and heat in order to prepare. So you have to plan for all of those contingencies. And also, then you're locked into one location. You're not going to be flexible to move if something hits. So, reasonably speaking, you might be able to store up a few weeks or a few months worth of food. I can say from our own personal experience that it's quite heartbreaking when you do store up food and it gets exposed and you get weevils in it and you have to throw that prep away. That's heartbreaking. Or just certain things, we didn't realize dried lentils or dried beans don't cook the same way when they're 2 years old. You can still cook and eat them, but they're not the same as when you buy them fresh. So you have to account for those things. And then those foodstuffs become just something to eat in an emergency so that you don't starve, but you don't relish eating them. And they just get shunted farther and farther into the shelf. So people always talk about rotating your stock, making sure that you're eating the things that you're storing and then replacing them. There's a friend of ours who always says 2 equals 1 and 1 equals none. So if you only have one item on the shelf, you're as good as have none, because if you use that one and you don't have a backup, then you don't have it stored up. I want to make sure that we get to some of these comments just with regard to learning how to feed yourself. While the electricity is still on, YouTube has plenty of videos for food lessons, hacks, tricks, and so forth. There's no excuse not to cook for yourself and control what you're putting in your body. Another comment, basically asking the only way restaurants can keep their costs affordable is what? Think about it. They're going to buy the cheapest cuts of meat, the cheapest oils, the cheapest flours, etc. And then who knows what else. So you may get some meat and some textured vegetable protein or some cricket flour. I've already started noticing posts about not just shrinkflation, so products getting smaller but charging the same price, but also labels changing. So something that used to be labeled ice cream is now labeled frozen dairy product. Probably because they're no longer able to call it ice cream because it doesn't have the ingredients needed to be able to call something ice cream. So another thing to look out for when you are shopping, just keep making sure that you're reading the product so that it hasn't been swapped out for something else.
Yeah.
I don't
I was just going to go. We've got another comment
there.
from Christine.
Mhm.
Oh, did you want? I'll go back to you. And great. I mean, this is another interesting question, isn't it? Is when did you wake up? When did you start sort of preparing? And Christine says, I started making changes in 2016 when I began to understand our wider circumstances and the scary implications that represented. 2020 put a fire under me. Yeah, lots of love. Thanks, Christine. And then she goes on to say, systems, skills, and community are critical to develop. Community is the most difficult to cultivate.
Yeah.
I totally agree. That's why we value this community who turns up and joins us on a Sunday, because we're all sharing and asking questions and learning from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So that community aspect is so challenging. It's wonderful to have the virtual community that we have and to be able to share these ideas and learn from each other. But when you don't have that in your local environment as well, it can be very unsettling. So we've recently moved to a new place, and I've been trying to explore where I might be able to build community. So looking at things like CSAs and that sort of thing. I don't know how much I will really share in common with the types of people who seem to be gravitating towards those community activities here in my local area. It seems like we have a very different worldview from one another. I haven't actually gone and met the people, so I will give myself that chance. But just from a quick view, for example, there's an organization called Food Not Bombs. I don't know if you have it in the UK, but it's here in the United States and it's around the country, and they distribute free food, largely vegetarian and vegan food for the community. But the local chapter of Food Not Bombs in my area, their website in very large letters says, fuck the USA, fuck capitalism, stop all war and genocide, no war but the class war. And then in small letters underneath, Food Not Bombs, free food on Saturday. So, it's like,
sounds like your sort of people.
it's a challenge. And then like I looked at a CSA as well, and this is something that I would love to hear more from you, Susan, and others on the chat as well. So the local CSA here, it's about $30+ a week. So not cheap, but of course I'm not looking for cheap when you're looking for food security. But for $33, you get spinach, kale, chard, carrots, and turnips. It's like that's a lot of money. I don't know if I can really afford $33 a week for some greens. So obviously then the next alternative is I have to grow them myself, which I am working on. But it's not just me, for a lot of people, that's an amount of money for what you get in return that they can't afford. So where do we find a kind of a balance there? And is growing your own food feasible for everyone? Maybe it is. I don't know. I don't know what everybody's circumstance is. So I'd love to hear what other people say.
On the CSA front, I agree with you. But that's the real cost of food. What I like about mine, and I've been in the CSA for 15 years now, there's been some really lean times. And the people who run it hardly get paid anything. They're just doing it for love, mostly, and the lifestyle. And I look upon it, that money is my investment, because I don't grow things anymore. So I'm investing in something being available locally. And it does put you in touch with the realities of harvest, decimated by drought or bad weather, and you share in it. And you said about the community thing. We're doing sort of Lent soup lunches, and the CSA donated some of their excess veg, or it's not really excess because they could share it with the members, but they're donating. And so there is support locally being given, and they've got a lot of new members recently, because I think this whole food security thing is rising above the cost issue, because that's,
Mhm.
and historically, we used to pay a lot more from our income for food. Now it's so low compared to what it used to be that we've got used to low prices for food and don't value it enough.
Yeah. Stuart Holmes left us a comment. He said, definitely it's much better for you. Many of the people worked and lived on the farm I grew up on and cooked some of the best food I have eaten, which is great. Yeah. Keith says, the thing with prepping is in the event of shit hits the fan and we actually need to make use of our supplies, our biggest threat will come from our neighbors and all those other oblivious people who make fun of preppers. That's the majority, as far as I can tell. Um, Absolutely true. It's that, your neighbors, you always think of community as being the people around you, but your neighbors can actually be um, either your biggest strength or your biggest risk, depending on where you live and who you're surrounded by. So, very true. And actually, Selko in this book talks about um, doing so many things at night under cover of darkness so that the people around you can't see what you're up to. So if you're out gathering wood or foraging or things like that, you might want to do that at night when it's dark and other people can't see you. Although I would imagine that everybody else would be out at night doing the same thing. Um, but yeah, it just speaks to the point of, other people who are less prepared than you will want what you have and will come and take it from you by whatever means they can.
If they
Um,
know that you've got it. And I think that's a question I asked myself, and I wondered what other people think, is if you have stored some food, would you share it with your neighbors? It's a real moral dilemma, isn't it? And yet, if you share it, it's not going to last very long. And you could say, well, is it the three little pigs? The one who built the house that could withstand, the others wanted to shelter in it, even though they had ridiculed the pig, about building this stronger house
mm.
for harder times.
It's a really
So
good question, Susan. I mean, in my mind, the point of storing food is so that you can share it with others who need it. I imagine, of course, you can't give it all away week one, and then you yourself find that you have nothing to eat. But um, I would hope that we would be in a situation where if we have something and others have nothing, that we would be able to share and they would be grateful in accepting that. But who knows? You just never know until you're in the situation what actual reality you're going to face.
we've got
Ca-
some more comments coming in. Do
yeah,
you want to do yours
I'll do
first?
I'll do one. I have a couple, but I'll do one. Kearney says, I feel that resiliency skills need to be taught at the neighborhood level, community grassroots groups. Minimum of 3 months stored food is my goal. I have very specific dietary needs, gluten and dairy free, low carb. My keto diet is not going to be possible. So I'm working on adapting sardines, coconut butter, ghee, mung beans, adzuki beans, kombu to make the legumes more digestible, honey, salt, coffee, and good chocolate, sprouting seeds, canned and dried fruit. I'm actually working on putting together a class on this. Nutrient dense foods are key, spices and herbs. I'm growing arugula and Swiss chard herbs on my condo balcony. Wow, wonderful comment. That is so helpful. Nutrient dense foods, absolutely. There's no point in growing an abundance of something that isn't going to actually give you any strength or fortitude. So, if others have thoughts on the most nutrient dense, efficient plants to grow, that would be great to hear. I think Jerusalem artichokes is one that comes to mind.
Yeah, some really good points there. And yeah, the thing that one, we tried to buy some big cans of sardines because that's something we eat on a keto diet. And they're impossible to get in the UK at the moment. You can only buy little tiny tins. So that's another sort of change.
Interesting.
The other thing I was going to say is I did cross-post a food storage article that came from Liza on Becoming, and it had some really interesting points in there about food storage. So I recommend people, and I'll put the link in the show notes. But one of the things that came up is the importance of fats, that people forget that you need fats in order to be healthy and also in order to digest food. And that's what makes sardines such a good food source. The other, we've had one comment from Deepwater, in desperate times, you do not want to look well fed and dressed, which will make you a target. So important, that whole thing. One of the reasons that we gave up our vegetable garden wasn't just age, it was how would we protect it if people knew that you had it. And that was one of the things I thought was interesting, as you say, about going out at dark, is that you only have trusted people who know where you live, who guard you as you're going out to trade. That it's not just community, it's about trust. There will be a wider community in all sorts of ways, but really you want a small band of people who you can trust and know that they will look after you if you look after them. I think that's might be family, might be people in your neighborhood who you get on well with, even though you might disagree about other things, you know that you'll trust each other.
I'll just jump in with a further comment on that exact point. There's a point here that says buy some larger clothes so you look like you're losing weight. So buy things now that are one size bigger than you wear now, so that it looks baggy on you. Cook food with wind in mind, so smells don't travel in a direction that gives you away. That's another really good point.
Yeah, wow, that's really going to be difficult, isn't it? That's really sort of thinking that things are really harsh. But somehow, if we start to think like that and prepare for that, that's a skill in itself, isn't it? These are skills, not just like cooking or being able to ferment food. I mean, the other thing that surprised me about the article about food storage was one about how just eating rabbits, you can still die. You might have a full stomach, but unless there's fat, and that's the other thing with venison. So all this thing about going out and hunting, you do need, it's just not going to cut it. And you do need other food sources. And the other was monotony, that people actually stop eating if the food becomes so monotonous, you lose your appetite. So I'm going straight to a comment from Christine, who I know keeps rabbits. So I tried to get my neighbours into my meat rabbits, but even after giving hundreds of pounds of free rabbit meat away to generate interest, nobody cared. I dialed back production accordingly. Well, that's very telling, isn't it? And this is what we find, is that other people just think we're doomers and crazy. And, we're the ones who will be prepared, who will have the resources and the assets and the skills. So which comes back to my moral question. Here, it's another Christine comment. My local CSA became cost prohibitive too. Car side service to luxury automobiles next to my rust bucket became something I dreaded. So I had to become my own farmer rancher. Yeah, this is the other thing, is it's for the affluent. They won't be hungry. It'll be the poor who are really struggling and will be most effective.
There's a comment from M. Warner who says, have you heard of the Woodsmith Mine project in North Yorkshire, UK, which is pitched as a game changer for fertilizer and global food yield? The Woodsmith Mine is being developed by Anglo American to extract mineral from 2 deep seams of polyhalite beneath the North York Moors National Park, extending eastward under the North Sea. Polyhalite is a naturally occurring mineral rich in potassium, sulfur, magnesium, and calcium. The Geological Survey revealed this is the world's largest and highest grade polyhalite deposit. The mine will produce 20 million tons a year and is expected to be in production for 100 years. And then M. Warner goes on to say, individual food prep is no good. We need communal prep and shared kitchens, cooking for a local community, like the People's Kitchen sort of thing. It's much more energy efficient than each individual family using an oven, etc. Even things like street food vendors that visit local housing estates and distribute food from a central location is much more efficient and nutritionally fulfilling. rather than everyone sitting in their own silo with tins of food. It's pointless and selfish and not going to help humanity at all. Great comment.
Yeah, great. And I totally agree. I think that's the way forward, isn't it? That's what it will become practically. And so we've had one from Bob Jones, and says, I'm hoping you will discuss how people can get motivated to garden and share produce. It's really interesting. When I first moved here to this particular community, I had been self-sufficient and keen gardener, learning all the new ways to plant and grow and harvest food. So I was very enthusiastic, and I'd read somewhere about gardens sharing. So I put a message out on a local notice board about, were there people who would like to share their garden, or had plots of land that weren't in use. And I would find gardeners and people who were looking for land, people who didn't have enough of their own. I got inundated with people offering me land and gardens and old orchards and all sorts of things. I could only find one or two people who were at all interested, and it never sort of took off because the plots weren't near where they lived. They had to travel to them, maintain them, take their tools over, set up an infrastructure. So that was the downside. But on the upside, we have allotments here, what's called allotments. I don't know if you have them in America,
Community
but
gardens.
community gardens where people have their own plot, but they do share things. And one of the things that's happened in the last few years is that we now have a large part of that, which is a community allotment. And it's used as a healing space as well, growing herbs and getting people out in the open air and doing the sort of hard work of gardening. And it's lifting people out of mental illnesses and physically getting them back into better health because they're eating better food. So yeah, there's all sorts of things that could be done locally.
I think just to Bob's point or question, it's very difficult behavior change to get people to start gardening if this is not something that they're currently interested in or have ever done before. There's also a lot of mistakes that you make as a beginner, and you only get that one short growing window to get it right, to be able to grow enough food that you can eat. So again, just going back to what other people have been saying, it seems like these community models might be a better way. So maybe people just have to give a couple of hours a week of their time, and anyone can do whatever they're able to do in terms of digging or weeding or whatever needs to be done in this communal space. And then you get your share of the harvest, rather than everybody having their own individual garden, which half of those people are going to be doomed to fail, and the other half probably won't even get started. It's not always possible, though. I mean, again, I think about where I am, and it's a great idea, but I don't know how viable it would actually be. I don't have enough critical mass around me. I live in a very kind of dry and desolate place as well. So it really will depend. But I think the idea that there are people with more skills who can kind of take the lead, and others who can come and share in the labor might be a better model than everybody having a backyard garden. I don't know.
The other problem that Deepwater poses is that the problem with major brand freeze-dried prepper food like Mountain House is it's loaded with salt, so they can advertise a 30-year expiration date. Yeah, lots of salt in processed food, and this is what makes people unhealthy as well. And this is something that we're going to have to think about greatly, isn't it? We might be able to eat, but will it be actually good for us? Christine's come back on the rabbits, which I love. Domestic rabbits are lean, but have plenty of nutrition. Yeah, you're still going to get protein. But I do prepare rabbit meat in multiple ways to keep it interesting. I'm adding ghee and coconut oil for good shelf stable fat. Yeah, really, really important. I was just surprised by the article. I can't remember. It was called Rabbit Starvation, something like that, which I'd never heard of before. But it just underlines how important it is to be informed, isn't it, about food? And I think one of the earlier people mentioned about sprouting, which is something anybody can do, and that will give you very nutritious, high vitamin food, and that can be done with dried beans or wheat. You
In a
can
windowsill,
sprout.
and you don't even really need a plot of land to be able to sprout seeds, and they're very high nutritional value. So yeah, that's something that anyone can do, and that might be a gateway for some people. Once you start growing something successfully and you're able to eat it, it may make you more attuned to actually growing more things. Like, okay, now that I've done sprouts and I've successfully grown them and eaten them, now I'm going to start with lettuce or spinach or radishes. Radishes, for me, when I was a beginner gardener, I had read somewhere and I found it to be very true. They're very easy to plant because they're nice, big, fat seeds. They grow very quickly. They're very gratifying because you feel like, okay, I can do this. It's, the tops come up. You can eat everything. They grow very quickly. And so, yeah, and then you can plant a new crop of them when the first one's done. I just want to thank everyone for this wonderful, rich discussion. We have tons of comments coming in, so I can barely keep up with them. But let me try. Kearney says, where I live, we are blessed with a strong local food economy. People love the farmers markets, CSA, and farm stands. However, in winter, they're buying the same foods from the grocery store, imported from Mexico and outrageously expensive, nutrients depleted by the time they get them home. Adapting to seasonal eating is key. Roots, sprouts, canned or frozen or dehydrated fruits. We have lots of little food pantries here on the street. Everyone contributes, and people do this on a voluntary basis. That sounds like a wonderful community. Well
Where do
done,
they
Karen.
live?
We'll all move there. Boudica says, I just spent time in Melbourne and they have a great thing going in the heart of the city. Social housing all have allotments and they're beautifully kept. Spaces along streets and parks are used to grow vegetables and herbs. And this is all in the city. We saw something sort of related last summer. We were in a small town in central Texas, pretty much a food desert. Otherwise, there was a supermarket in that town, but small and high priced. But the local bank had a vegetable garden out back, and someone tended to it. I don't know who they hired to tend it, but anyone could take from it. It was a community garden, but nobody had to take their own land and spend the time growing. It was just presented to the community by the bank. So there are ways to go around it.
We do have that. We have that in the UK. It's got incredibly edible Long Morton, I think it is. And I took that idea because I've got like a flower bed at the beginning of our road, and I've planted it with herbs and strawberry plants, and people just come and take the strawberries when they're there. So it's just a nice thing to do and offer. A comment from Blaine's Tube, never underestimate fat in the diet. Yeah, really, really important. And Christine, again, the rabbits are in that notorious study were starving as well. Go figure, eating starving rabbits isn't going to keep you from starving. The one I read was that it was to do with trappers and people who are out in the Wild West, and also explorers in the Arctic who were starving, and the Inuit Indians wanted to give them fats and blubber and animal organs and all the things that they ate, and the explorers refused. And the Inuits survived the dire situation that they were in, but the explorers didn't because they wouldn't eat the fat. So I don't know if I don't know about any studies on it, but that was what was in the article that I read.
Stuart Holmes, I think he's replying to the earlier comment about the local fertilizer in North Yorkshire. He says, this sounds very good. I have looked at a number of off-grid farm projects across parts of the EU. These have teams which help one another. And then Rachel Wild is responding to, again, this point about fats. Yes, Susan, fats are vitally important. Eating only wild rabbit or other extremely lean meats without additional fat sources can lead to a fatal condition known as rabbit starvation or protein poisoning. This occurs because wild rabbit meat is exceptionally high in protein, but extremely low in fat. She adds wild fruit tree mapping and getting volunteer groups together to pick the fruit, leaving 10%-ish with the owner and the rest for the community, is an excellent idea that runs successfully in Sheffield. And then Kearney says, if everyone wants to know, they live in Vancouver Island. And they also add a great YouTube channel for gardening and pantry building is Little Mountain Ranch. It's very helpful. So
We'll put that.
wonderful
Yeah.
resources. Yeah. I love the idea of wild fruit napping. And it's true. It was true anyway. When we lived on the east coast of Canada, there were fruit trees.
Oh, you've frozen again, Zahra. Yeah, I had an orchard given to me as part of the garden scheme, and we did get people to come and share the fruit, pick the fruit. And I remember having sackfuls. I mean, the great thing about apples is sometimes you have an abundant year and then you have a lean year, and having sackfuls and just taking them around to different places and share. I mean, I live in that sort of community as well, which is good. Bob Jones has come back and says, you brought up labour as an issue. Yeah, this is a big thing. We'll probably all be working on farms and in gardens come the future. I think this is a core problem. Unfortunately, most individuals in the US are not willing to do the work to set up gardens and grow food or share. It's hard work because it's not just about growing things. The time I found it most difficult was harvesting everything and storing it and working out how you store it, and low energy and all of those sort of factors. It's very, very hard physical work, and we're not used to it anymore. Deepwater again says, in a food crisis, hunting and poaching local game will be wiped out in a couple of months. I'd say a couple of days. If everybody's out there trying to do that, there's not that much wildlife left. We have managed to decimate it, or we live in a city and it's going to be rats and foxes, which I think he's mentioned in the book, the shit hits the fan one, that he thinks he ate cat at some stage and
Yes.
probably a rat at some.
Yes. Yeah. He said, the big fear a lot of people have is that people devolve very quickly and suddenly there's like cannibalism. And he said that that is not how it happens. However, you do start eating food that's maybe not as fresh as you would have liked it before, things that have gone off a little bit, but you still cook them and eat them. Because you have to. And he said, for sure, I'm pretty sure I ate a cat at some point. One other point that he made in the book, this is the book by Selko Begovic that we're using as a jumping off point today. He talks about foraging, and that's usually something that comes up in these types of conversations. That, you can grow your own food. You can also forage in your local area. He said, I know it's popular in some circles that you can survive and live by foraging, but he said in terms of urban survival, he thought it was quite overestimated. He said it may work if you have a lot of knowledge already going into the shit hits the fan situation about what's edible in your area, or if you have lots of resources and those plants are abundant. But he said we were average urban folks and our knowledge about edible plants was limited to maybe 1 or 2 plants that you could turn into a tea. And so they did that. However, that's not going to keep you fed for very long. There were, 2 things that they could make tea out of. So it's something that, again, might be for a specialized area. It might be in a place where you can forage for things, or where there's a high level of knowledge of what can be eaten. There's also a big fear when you're foraging. There are a lot of lookalike plants, some things that are edible and some things that are highly toxic. And so you really have to know what you're doing, because you likely in an shit hits the fan situation will not have resources to be able to turn to, or the internet to be able to check with, to say, is this the right one or the wrong one? So you do have to be quite careful. So thinking of foraging as a big part of the strategy going forward may need to be reconsidered.
Yeah, I think as we come to a close, and it's been a wonderful conversation and great comments, I've got a couple more I wanted to read, and I just wanted to post, because next week's Easter, isn't it? Certainly in many parts of the world, not I know not in Greece where my sister lives, and whether we actually get together next week or not. So it would be good to hear from you if whether you would like us to be here next week or whether we just take a break. And while you're thinking about that and answering that question, let me read another comment from Deepwater. Venezuela's severe economic and inflation crisis. People resorted to eating pets, including dogs and cats, due to extreme food shortages and hyperinflation. Yeah, I did wonder about that, because there's masses of food that goes to dogs and cats and pets. And, will people store that? Will they keep them? Will they eat them? All of these questions, it just depends how desperate we are, doesn't it? And Blaine's Tube, plant identification books are important to secure. Yeah, any books about resources, about food storage, about plant medicine. One of the things that in the book, and this is the other thing, we thought if we did get together next week, and we're very open to that, there's whole sections in the book about personal mindset, resourcefulness, capacity, and all these conversations are about that, aren't they? We're imagining the worst and just saying, okay, how will we handle it? And Christine says, don't forget to prepare for your pets. On that point, yeah. Are you going to feed them? Dogs do great on raw rabbit meat. Just say, yeah, dogs and cats used to eat raw meat. They're not used to tinned stuff. They could probably be healthier.
Yeah.
So,
but for those of us who do have pets who are members of the family, storing up the medicine that they need, or a little bit of extra dry food for your cat or for your dog, is part of preparing, just as you would prepare for other members of your family. And making sure that when you're looking at water as well, that there's enough water for the pets. I don't know that the immediate move would be to, kill your household pets and eat them. I think
last
that,
resort.
yeah, I mean, imagine if things get desperate enough. That, I think, goes along with the idea of, like, we suddenly become cannibals and start eating our neighbors. I think that is it takes a long time to get there. And for people, I mean, Selko wrote that there were people who were killing stray dogs in the streets in his city under siege. But when you've raised a pet and had it in your house and treated it as a family member, I think you would be just as inclined as you would to eat your family member as you would to eat your beloved cat or dog. So
very cheerful note to finish on.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a few. I mean, so one other example, just in terms of eating animals, hunting wild animals. We had the experience of living in Angola about 20 years ago when we worked in international development. And when we lived there, the civil war had just ended, and it had lasted for 25 or 30 years. And there were no wild animals left in Angola. They were thinking about, at that time, re-importing them from Namibia and South Africa to open up game parks again, because all of the animals had been poached. But it took decades for that to happen. I don't think that's something that happens in the first few months. But yes, that's how desperate times can get. That was such a brutal war that they lay landmines in mango trees so that people couldn't access fresh fruit off of trees without getting limbs blown off them. And it really is brutal what people can do to each other. And so we just pray that those times are over, and that this will not come upon us. However, it's worth talking about and having these conversations. Stuart Holmes said, "This is really special. I hope to link up again. I'll put together an outline of some of my childhood and future ideas." That would be wonderful, Stuart. We would love that. Carney also says, thank you so much. Great discussion. Marlise says, Easter is a great time to go to church, which are great communities and have massive programs for needy people. Rachel Wild says, I would rather lose my life than my humanity. No to cannibalism. Absolutely. So yeah, folks, let us know if you would like us to be back next Sunday, or we were inclined to respect those who do observe Easter by taking the day off. So let us know what your thoughts are. Alberta Betsy's van life says, zinc rod and copper rod together will purify water. Tips like this can save money. So those are great things to look into. Thank you, Betsy. That's really something I will check out, because keeping enough water on hand isn't always going to be possible. So we are going to have to think about water sources that may not be purified, and what will we do to make that drinkable.
A couple more. Blaine's Tube, prepping is looked at by many people as strange and odd. Yeah, definitely. Those same people think nothing of loading up on insurance coverage. Yeah, this,
So
I think the
interesting, yeah.
difference, yeah, very interesting, and a major difference, isn't it? That the people in this community are taking responsibility, whereas a lot of other people delegate that responsibility, thinking that other people are going to take care of them. I wish I was that optimistic. Bob Jones says, I recommend reading Mutual Aid, a great resource about helping each other to survive. Yeah, and I wondered, the PDF of the book that we're talking about, can that be sent to people, or is that something people have to pay for?
No,
Zahra?
I believe it is available online. So I'll find the link, and if it's freely available, I'll include it in the Collapse Life recap. We could just show you what it looks like. So anyone who wants to look it up can also do so.
Yeah, great. And as I said, we would continue this next week if you'd like us to do that. And Christine says they want you to starve. You just have to accept that as a reality. I'm afraid I agree with you. This is all planned, and this is all putting the squeeze on us again, isn't it? And that's why it's good that we're having these conversations and empowering each other to say, no, we're not going to starve. We're going to be resourceful, and we won't give them that satisfaction. Christine says, don't give them that satisfaction.
Absolutely.
So it's been great. It's been wonderful. And thank you all for participating so wonderfully original and solutions wise. It's been enlightening. Really good. Thank you.
So Susan, what's the consensus? Will we be back next Sunday?
I'm happy to be back here if people want to join us. What do you think, Zahra?
Yeah, maybe we will come back and we'll keep talking about this book. And those who are unable to join us because they are at church will be able to watch the recap and leave comments then if you had something to add or share and are unable to join us live. But thank you, everyone. This has really been a wonderful discussion, and even though it's dark, there's always so much shared strength that we draw from knowing that there are people like us who are taking the time to have these conversations and share this with each other. Keith says, the book is free on archive.org, which is great. So we will definitely put the link in our recaps so that you can just easily one click and find them. Someone said, truth be told, I haven't listened to a live conversation on Substack in months. I only make time for practical and useful information. And Carney says, it's going to be a long burn, more discussions to come. I'll join. So
jolly good. Thank you.
Great.
And Christine,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. And yeah, we will be here next week, and hopefully some people will join us. And if not, you can watch the recording. And do share any resources. We will put that in when we repost. If you're not subscribed, to either Zahra's wonderful Collapse Life or my courageous conversations, then do so.
Please,
And just a final few comments. Christine says, I couldn't even get family to start a buying club, let alone a mutual aid group. Yeah, this is why it's so important that we are together and talking about these things, and who knows, it might spark something locally. I mean, you said about community, Zahra, very quickly. Interestingly, my husband ran a cinema club at the local pub for 6 years. It was incredibly popular. COVID shut it down completely. My husband became a hermit. He couldn't bear to go out and have those conversations with people who are very different to us. This week, under a certain circumstances of things happens, he's decided to start it again. And already people in the street are saying to me, how great that the film club's starting again. So it doesn't have to be about survival and food storage. It could be anything that gets people together and makes us connect with each other. And on that note, Blaine's Tube says free stuff. Yeah, free stuff is good. See you next time.
Thanks so much, everybody. And we'll see you next week.